Through the week, you'll have seen live crossings to the interviews taking place at the Judicial Service Commission. The Commission's been selecting people to nominate as judges. But our judiciary, in some ways, like many other institutions in our country, is dealing with issues of transformation and diversity. If you look at our judges, you will see that there is a large number of men and not nearly as many women judges. If you look at senior advocates, the people who often become judges, you'll find there also very few women advocates as well. So why is our judiciary not transforming with regard to gender? Well, joining me to talk about this is the attorney, Diana Mabasa, at Diana Mabasa Incorporated, an attorney there, the Associate Professor of Law at the Wits School of Law and an advocate at the Johannesburg Bar, Professor Bonita Meyersfield, a member of the Johannesburg Society of Advocates and Advocates for Transformation, Amelia Rohani Musalakai, and a junior counsel at the Pan-African Bar Association of South Africa, Advocate Lizelle Haskins. Advocate Haskins is also an acting judge, and so you will find that I will address her by the title Acting Judge. This is the conversation that we're going to be having as we go through the afternoon. I would like to start then with Acting Judge Haskins. Ma'am, thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. I have to start by asking this question. Do you feel that as a woman sitting on the bench in a position to make really important decisions as an acting judge, do you think you get the same sort of respect as a man? Do you feel that you're treated in the same way that men are treated, sitting in the same position?
Good afternoon, Stephen, and good afternoon to your viewers. Let me start by saying that I'm currently not acting. I'm only scheduled to act in the 4th term, but I have been acting since 2016. I've also had the opportunity to be appointed as a company's tribunal adjudicator. So I've been in the position of adjudicating over various types of matters, both in the High Court in the Gauteng division, and then also in the company's tribunal. One of the experiences that I've had, one of the experiences I've had was having judicial training. And so the judicial training is supposed to sort of be that bridge between your practice and then also sitting on the bench. And I think as the judiciary, I think that was their contribution to the transformation, to ensure that those that are going to be sitting on the bench do get that judicial training. During the judicial training, there was quite a number of women that formed part of the training, and there was of those women, there was a lot more black women part of the training. So I think from that perspective, there has been at least some transformation from the judiciary itself. But most of the contribution really comes within the practice, and as Babasa, you've got to do that. We understand the need to do a skills transfer. So as you're doing skills transfer, you obviously have to expose various practitioners to different kinds of work. And I think once you're able to build a good practice as a counsel, you're able to comfortably deal with matters that are before you when you're adjudicating. Again, I have the fortunate position of doing tax work, specializing in tax and various other matters, and I'm constantly in trial court as well as a motion court. And so because I have that kind of practice, I'm able to understand the subject matter. I'm also able to deal with different kinds of issues, whether it's procedural, etc. And I think that then puts me in good stead to be able to comfortably sit on the bench and adjudicate on matters, whether it's in the High Court or the tribunal. And so for me, I think that is really how you do the transformation. But I mean, there's always going to be that perception that black and maybe female is not as competent, but it's a perception that we can dispel through that multi-pronged approach, through the skills transfer, through the judicial training, and then more particularly by actually sitting on the bench and getting to deal with matters. And so when we look at that multi-pronged approach, you'd be able to at least instill confidence. But again, it's just how you, and for me at least, it was how I dealt with matters. Not every party or litigant who came before me was confident that I would be able to deal with it. But with those tools in hand, they eventually get to see that you are capable and competent. I know, and I think I shared this with previously, that a colleague of mine, much senior than I was, had to appear in front of me, but I had a number of matters that was on my roll for that day. And he said he was a bit apprehensive when we started, but as he got to see how I dealt with it, he found more comfort and confidence that I would be able to deal with his matter. And so he was kind enough to share that with me afterwards. So from a transformation point of view, I would definitely say the Bar Association, and in particular my bar with Babasa, and the judiciary with the judicial training, and then ultimately the acting stance. Once you put those things in place, you're able to, and you have a focus on black and female, you would then be able to make that meaningful transformation. And just before I end, I actually think that the past week and the JSC interviews gives us quite a bit of hope, because when you're looking at the SC appointments, we have 3 females or 3 black females, and then a black male, and we have a white male. So that already tells you that there has been that move within the SC appointments that we have now. There's also the 2 deputy judge presidents within the Limpopo and Free State division who also happen to be black female women. So there has been that transformation that you're able to see. But it's not something that you'll be able to pick up immediately, only because, just by way of background, Stephen, when you're appointed permanent, you obviously start your years from 1 year onwards, and so you'll always find that the top of the judges, or the top 10 or top 15 within a particular division, would be predominantly male. But you have to look at what's happening at the bottom, because the bottom tells you how much appointments are being made. And so when you see the bottom is female and black heavy, then you know that transformation is already in progress. And so as they attain the years and move up, they would then be able to move up in a manner that actually shows transformation with a particular focus on black females.
It's a fascinating process. I mean, I was sort of reminded today that in 1994 there were only 2 female judges, and they were both white. And there's a big conversation around the rate of change since then. Dinah Mabasa, you're an attorney. How important is it for you to see people who, if I may use the phrase, who look like you, who are also black women, on the bench? What does that do to you as an attorney when you see that it is not only people who, well, look like me on the bench? How important is it to you to see people who look like you reflected on the bench, who you and your colleagues will appear in front of?
Yes, thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon to you and to your viewers. I think it's incredibly important, and I actually think that not enough has been done to see people like me on the bench. It instills confidence in the judiciary and in the justice system as a whole. If we see more women, I think we've gone a long, long way in the transformation of the judiciary, but I honestly don't believe that we are there yet. Until we see a proper 50% representation of women on the bench, there's still room for improvement. And in terms of Section 1742 of the Constitution, the judiciary must reflect the race and gender composition of the country. And I don't even think we are halfway there. It is incredibly difficult also for black female practitioners to get there. I have been fortunate to act like my colleague, Ms. Hoskins. So I have acted, but I know that for black women to stay in the profession until they reach that level where they can be appointed as acting judges, it is a long, hard, difficult road. There are so many barriers that prevent them from getting there. And I just think that, there's absolutely more room for women and people who look like me to be on the bench.
Dinah, I mean, I found it fascinating, and I will ask other members of the panel this question as well, because I found just these numbers interesting. I mean, in 2017, the percentage of judges on our bench who were women was 32%. But at around the same time, the percentage of magistrates was 40%. It's significantly higher in my view, not 50%, not what you and what our society should aim for. But I wondered why that might be. Might it be because it doesn't necessarily take as long to become a magistrate, so the rate of transformation, if I can use that phrase, might be quicker? Could there be something else, maybe to do with the advocate's profession, that means that there's still a smaller percentage of women judges than there is a percentage of women magistrates?
I cannot really speak on behalf of the magistracy, Stephen. So, but what I serve as on the governing body of the Law Society of South Africa as well, and I do know that. And while you were asking the question, my internet was a bit unstable, so I couldn't really hear what you were saying with regard to advocates. So maybe can you just repeat that part of the question?
So the point the point I'm trying to get to is that we have a higher proportion of female magistrates than we do female judges. Now, to become a judge, generally the way you do it in most cases is you become an advocate. And so I'm wondering if there's something happening in the advocate's profession that is sort of slowing down the rate of progress for women judges as compared to women magistrates.
I cannot really... Yeah, I cannot really say that it is easier to become a magistrate, but I think the pace of transformation in the magistracy has been much faster than in the judiciary. And you must remember that since the change in 1994, since the move to democracy, and the judiciary now does not consist of only, the pool is not only from advocates. It's from attorneys, the sidebar, magistrates, and advocates that judges are drawn.
We're going to continue with our panel. Why is it that we still have such a small proportion of female judges? Discussion around gender and the judiciary. Diana Mabasa. We are speaking, of course, to a very large panel today. We're speaking as well to Amelia Rohani Musalakai. We're speaking to Advocate Lizelle Haskins, and then also Professor Benita Mayersfield, who's also an advocate. In fact, Professor Mayersfield, if I can come to you now. Some people have suggested that there is an issue around the patriarchal culture, I suppose, in the advocate's profession. Is there something in that? Is it harder to be a female advocate than to be a male advocate because of something within the profession itself? And I'm talking, I suppose, about patriarchy.
The answer is a resounding yes, and it's evident from a number of sources. The bar itself has recorded innumerable instances where women have complained of sexual harassment, exclusion, demeaning behavior. The research on this is extensive, and of course just the narration from women throughout the bar confirms this. There's a very healthy sense of denial from a lot of the men in the bar, at the bar. But I think that denial is a softer voice than it used to be. There is quite a strong community of female advocates at the bar, and a lot of that community seeks to not only support one another, but also to really insist that the current status quo is entirely fraught and exclusionary. And it exists in a myriad of sometimes almost imperceptible, but accumulative aspects. So, for example, Advocate Hofmeyer once wrote in De Rebus several years ago about asking for a trial where there was no urgency involved to be postponed to a date after she would have returned from maternity leave. And the judge refused. But in a different set of circumstances, agreed to a postponement of a matter where the advocate was simply unavailable due to other work of a postponement that was about the same time. So why would you postpone because a male advocate has a workload that demands a delay, a postponement for that period of time, but not for maternity leave? There are also very insidious narrations and stories of junior counsel who have traveled to other provinces to appear in court with their senior counsel, and only to be told that there's not enough money for 2 rooms and they'll have to share a room with the male senior counsel, with all the consequences that incur. And there are a multitude of nodes of exclusion that occur throughout the process of one's career at the bar. The structure is also, of course, incredibly hierarchical. And that hierarchy is not entirely divorced from necessity. The extent to which one can really do well at the bar often depends on the amount of years that they've been there. And because the majority of people who have been there for a long time are men, you continue to have a very male-dominated hierarchy. One cannot, though, escape or ignore the fact that it's not simply about patriarchy, but also about racism. So to the extent that there are senior women at the bar, often many of them are white. And one obviously has to look at the phenomenon that not only is there an inequality based on sex and a hierarchy based on sex, but there's an inequality based on race too. And when it comes to transformation, some of the issues around race will trump some of the issues around sex, and some of the issues around sex will trump some of the issues around race. So the behavior that needs to change is a behavior that's etched into the fabric of the conduct of the bar, which sees itself as an accumulation of individuals. And that's the challenge that the bar itself faces. That's the challenge that many, many women at the bar face. And it's not a story that's limited only to the bar. It's a story that's common through workplaces. The statistics, depending on what you read, but some say that 1 out of every 3 women in a workplace will experience some form of sexual harassment. The sexual harassment, of course, operates on a spectrum, but all of it is alienating, and all of it creates fear, all of it denudes your ability to participate in that profession, in that workplace, as a professional as opposed to as a woman or as a person. And when these professional relationships are tainted by acts of power based on vulnerabilities around sex, around gender, of course, around sexual orientation, and other fault lines of discrimination, we see a situation in which it's actually much easier to leave the profession than it is to stay. Contrast this with the experience of white men and men, and it becomes clearer that there's a different set of struggles and barriers that men don't have to face. And therefore, there are other forms of exclusion, especially around race, but not those forms of exclusion. So we sort of look around at the pinnacle of the legal profession, advocates, attorneys, and go, where are all the black women? Why aren't there any women that we can appoint for the judicial positions? Now, firstly, there are a lot of amazing senior women across the race spectrum. The reality is, though, many, many, many superb candidates for the bar are forced out of the profession because of these very structural forms of malicious, benign sometimes, but almost imperceptible at other times, and at other times grossly obvious and horrific forms of discrimination.
Sure. It's quite a cocktail of ingredients that you've described, Professor Mayersfield. I understand that you may have to actually leave the conversation. Please feel free to do so if you do have to. Advocate Amelia Rahani Musalakai,
you can just call me Amelia, it's okay.
Amelia, thank you. I mean, it was quite a list of ingredients. I mean, does that resonate with you? Is that the kind of experience that you, colleagues of yours, have had?
100%. Definitely colleagues of mine have experienced this. I, to some degree, have also experienced it, but it is 100% accurate. It is a position of great respect within society. and a great kind of sense of power. And with that power will come the abuse of power, particularly by those who have kind of dominated the profession. And I really like what Prof. Meyersfeld has raised in terms of like the actual practical elements that lead to young Black juniors having to leave the bar. And you know, there are issues such as briefing patterns. There are issues such as late payment by our attorneys and colleagues at the sidebar. There are many ways in which the public can assist in the transformation of the legal profession, in something as simple as, you know, sponsoring a law student to make sure that they're able to complete their studies. If you are a owner of a company, to make sure that the legal counsel who your company chooses to use is Black counsel, is Black female counsel, and not to just give little kind of basic applications that don't involve any like gritty challenges in them, but to entrust major matters to young Black juniors, because they're infinitely capable, and yet they're being blocked from capacitating themselves, from being included in matters, from developing their skills. And there are practical issues, you know, if an advocate doesn't get paid, we in turn are not able to pay off the bills that we have every month. And so there are actual administrative practical challenges that lead to people having to drop out because clients don't pay, or more senior advocates don't pay, or attorneys don't pay. And it leads to an attrition of all of the transformative shoots that are trying to come up in the profession, as both Ms. Mabasa and my colleague Advocate Haskins were talking about. So if you want to see a more transformed judiciary, it's not out of your power. It's not out of your power to contribute to that. And something that I kind of wanted to discuss with regards to JSC hearings, and particularly in terms of the types of matters, as Advocate Haskins was talking about, that women are entrusted with. A lot of the time people will be like, oh, well, you're a woman, let's give you a family law matter, you know, because you must care about children and you must care about, you know, terrible men who are treating women badly. And I mean, that's a huge blight on our male colleagues who also care deeply about children and about injustices within like marital law. But women are just as capable to deal with huge mergers and acquisitions and maritime law and intellectual property and tax law. As my colleague has pointed out, there's nothing that cannot be done, and it is to everyone's best interest as a society in South Africa to make sure that there is as much diversity as possible. Because if you only have one type of thinking that is doing your problem solving, you're not going to have very good problem solving. And that is ultimately what the legal profession is there to do, is to solve society's problems. It is there to facilitate justice. It is to make sure that there is fairness. And if you do not make sure that you are representing many different ways and types of thinking, you're essentially only going to limit yourself. And we're going to limit ourselves as a society if we don't make sure we're reflective of all of the talents within our society.
I'd like to ask Advocate Haskins, if you don't mind. I mean, you've heard of these experiences, and you referred to an experience where you were actually sitting in a case, as adjudicating a case, and a sort of a senior, I presume, man, a senior colleague, sort of spoke about appearing before you. But when you hear these cases, and what it's been like, and the stories that we hear, and the ingredients that have sort of been put forward about what it's like at the bar, I mean, this must have a resonance for you as well. And I realize in some ways, there's some things that sometimes people don't want to talk about for whatever reason. But I mean, I imagine this must have resonance for you as well.
I'm probably associated with incredibly strong and very transformative women that want to push transformation. So we've in a sense, let me say, I've not personally experienced it because we're looking at, like Amelia was saying, you've got to look at clients and you've got to look at payments. And so we've been, at least from our bar, we have experienced clients who have had a very strong focus on we're going to be briefing black. I mean, obviously they're not doing it across the board, and we recognize that, and that's why we as PABASA are identifying various sectors, various people within the various relevant people within the different sectors that actually hold briefs. And so for us at least, it was to say, how do you keep black and black women in the bar? You obviously have to make sure that they're getting that kind of work. From my experience, I have been getting that kind of work, and from my colleagues within the PABASA, they've also been, to a large extent, experiencing the same thing. And because we recognize that, I mean, as PABASA, we recognize that it's not the same, and that women are not, women and black, or black and female are not well represented, or in terms of matters. We have taken it upon ourselves, or we have taken the responsibility to ensure that we at least bring that kind of work closer. And once you have that kind of work closer, we obviously want to make sure that you're trained in that area, so that transfer skill for us is a big component as well. And then in doing that kind of work, we then also try and see to what extent we can facilitate speedy or expeditious payments. But we don't want to say that that's an experience. We understand it's not an experience. It's not an experience everybody goes through, and that there are females that do struggle to get the kind of work. You're not always going to get attorneys or clients that actually want to ensure that black and female are part of the brief or the kind of work that there is, and they probably delay also on just making the payments. But from where we're sitting, I think, and it makes it sort of difficult to add on or add more than what has already been said, only because we've kind of taken on that responsibility as PABASA to say that we understand that this is an historical problem, we understand the situation that we're in, but what can we do? And so when you're surrounded by those kind of colleagues, it's difficult to sort of wallow in the negative and say, okay, there's no briefs, there's no money, or payments are not being done, there's not enough training or skill, etc. What we've really just done is to say, okay, let's be the solution to the problem. And so we've maybe, hopefully not in a naive way, we've sort of, I have at least put it on the back burner to say, okay, the problem is there, it's been there, but how do we take responsibility for the transformation, specifically within PABASA, and then obviously colleagues that are outside of PABASA.
It's such an interesting conversation. More on this to come. We'll continue this panel conversation with our panel around gender and the judiciary. Stay with us here. We're in conversation with our panel. We're speaking to the attorney, Diana Mabasa, the advocate, Amelia Rohana Masalakai, and the advocate and occasional acting judge, Lisselle Haskins. Continuing, of course, our conversation around gender and the judiciary. Amelia, if I may, you will have been watching the Judicial Service Commission interviews. They've been live on TV. I've heard from judges from all parts of our society who say that they're incredibly stressful. How did you find the way that women candidates for positions within the judiciary were asked questions?
Stephen, I thought some of the questions were quite unfair. I thought that the direction in which women judges were kind of grilled and the topics that they were grilled on was imbalanced. And as Prof. Meyersfeld had alluded to, the bar reflects South African society, is a microcosm of South African society, as is the judiciary. And so the unconscious biases that South African society will have will also creep into the JSC interviews. And I wanted us to kind of reflect on and think about, the proportion of women commissioners who were at the JSC hearings, and what that does in terms of the types of questions that are asked of our colleagues, as well as the unconscious biases that get conveyed through the types of questions. I mean, just as a basic example, Judge Catherine Setlwane was grilled on her temperament and her behavior And judges are harsh. They have to deal with heavy things, and they have to deal with incredibly intense things. And I mean, from the small amount of interviews that I saw, I thought the way, for example, judges Pillay and Judge Catherine were interviewed was quite harsh. I don't know if that was because the commissioners were taking a particular line with them. But yeah, I think things can always be done better. We can always do things in a better way.
Diana Mabasa, I mean, do you think that just watching these interviews, watching them play out, watching the way that women candidates are treated, do you worry that it'll stop women who are in a position to apply for a nomination or who could be nominated to be a judge? Do you think it discourages some from sort of seeking position to the judiciary?
Stephen, I think it is very intimidating to appear before the JSC and to be asked questions by those 23 commissioners. But I don't think it will stop women. I do believe that, you know, as Black women practitioners, we know that the playing field is not level. And we have to always do the extra bit to work harder and prepare better and do better. But I certainly don't think that it will discourage women from going there. I think they will still continue to apply for positions as judges.
Agreed.
It's just so important for women to be properly trained, properly mentored, and to be given acting stints. I think a big problem is that not enough women have stints as acting judges, because that is also really what prepares you adequately for appointment to the bench.
The opportunities, yeah.
I mean, you know, acting judges, and we see how important that is, because that's often a lot of questions that the Judicial Service Commission will come around from people's experience around that. I have to say, our country is not unique, unfortunately. From what I was able to see, I think it's 27% of federal judges in the United States, and they obviously have different levels, but 27% of federal judges are women. I mean, that's a very low figure. We're actually doing better than the United States from a start, you know, behind them. But, I mean, I still find that quite incredible. This is a ridiculous question, but it can't be said, surely, and Amelia, I'll put this to you first, it can't be said, surely, that there's anything structural about the law that makes it like this. I mean, that can't be said.
No, I don't think there's anything structural about the law itself, but the law is a reflection of society. The law is a living thing that reflects society, and it is something that we have created. And therefore, we also have to take responsibility for that as society, that if we want it to look better, then we have to make it look better. And actually, let me just correct myself. I don't want it to just look better. It's not as if transformation should just be simply a cosmetic thing of let's arbitrarily just pick up women and put them in places without, as Diana mentioned, the relevant support or experience or opportunities to develop oneself, because then you're just setting people up for failure. But it starts way at the bottom in terms of school, in terms of law school, in terms of support for students, in terms of support for junior advocates, in terms of the quality of work that people receive. It works its way up. And so we have to work on things if we want them to be better.
Yes, please go ahead.
And can I just say, you know, in that toxic cocktail that Professor Bonnie Myersfield mentioned of structural barriers to the judiciary, she didn't mention a very specific one, which is motherhood. You know, as women lawyers and advocates, a lot of us are also mothers, and sometimes I get the impression that you know, practitioners or advocates are punished for becoming mothers. You get in the big firms, you know, you will not get all the not transfer. You know, it's like a barrier, simply motherhood. You get excluded or sidelined when you become a mother.
Diana,
I don't know if you're
Diana, I was going to come to that because it has struck me as a sort of working journalist that there's a large percentage of female legal academics, which I would argue that percentage, I mean, this is just a sort of, I can't give you hard numbers on this, but it seems to me that certainly as public figures, there's quite a high proportion of legal academics who are female, far higher than they are judges. And that also makes me wonder about your point about whether just, being a female parent as opposed to being a male parent is a big factor here, about the actual profession.
Women opt out of the profession, Stephen, when they become mothers. It is just easier. And I speak from personal experience. I've been in the profession for more than 20 years, but I've also raised 4 children. And you find that it is just, women become sole practitioners so that they can manage their lives better. And as far as academics are concerned, I think personally they make excellent judges. If you look at Justices Yvonne Mogoro and Kate O'Regan that went to the Constitutional Court, straight from academia. But I don't find as many are considered now for judicial positions. But it is probably an easier route to the bench because it is not as difficult as going through the profession.
We're going to come to the end of this, I'm afraid, and it's a conversation I fear that we will have next year and the year after and the year after that, because I don't think the rate of transformation is going to be quick enough. But I'd like to give a final word, if I may, to Advocate Lizelle Haskins. You've described your experience. You'll be sitting, in fact, as an acting judge later in the year. Do you believe the experience, not just for yourself, but for women, is getting easier or not?
I think so. I definitely agree with that. It seems to be, because remember, appointments doesn't take place at the bottom, it actually takes place on the top. So when you're looking at the Gauteng division, you're having a judge president that's got to focus, or at least try and ensure that more females are acting, more females are going through the judicial training, and ultimately then makes it easy to make those appointments when you get to the JC. And so we've got to reflect on the interviews that have taken place recently. And so when you look at those interviews and you see whether or not those females had actually gone through that appointment or acting stints, it seems to be easier to be able to respond to the various questions that was posed to them. And it also sort of gives credence to the fact that when somebody is acted over a period of time, and we're not sure what long enough is, but over a period of time, and they've been able to attend to those matters, deal properly with it, and then make judgments, good judgments, let's say that. If once you have those acting judges go through that process, the females in particular, makes it so much more easier to be able to sit before those commissioners and go through that interview and let your record speak for itself. So from where I'm sitting, this basically we would definitely rely on, and I think that it has been done to a large extent, judge presidents of different divisions making sure that they give those opportunities to, advocates and attorneys. And so by doing that, they sort of giving you the capabilities to be able to sit in the other matters and ultimately to be appointed. And when you're appointed, you're then able to sort of work up the rank to the top 10, top 5, and sort of have that administrative control over the division. So for me, at least, my experience is that there has been a lot of effort from the judiciaries, specifically our top 3 within the first Pretoria and Johannesburg, and also that exposure has made a tremendous difference in not just in terms of how I act or the decisions that I make, but ultimately it also has a huge impact in the practice. So for me, yeah, I feel it and I see it, and I wish that I should have shared the sentiments of the professor. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but I'm just saying that there has been movement, especially when you look at the bottom part of the appointments, or at least the lower level, the more junior judges. You can actually see that it is making those changes that we want to see, it just won't make that immediate change because there is that years that speak for itself. So you come in at 1 year and you work your way up. So I think in the next 5-6 years, it will definitely look different, Stephen. It's not going to look the way it is. It is currently male-dominated at the moment, but it's historical and it's something that you can't do. You've got to wait until the judge retires so that it opens up more space. And as our female judges work their way up, which they are currently doing when we look at the SCA appointments, we will start seeing that real change. But it's not that there isn't any change. It's just that those changes has to be slow because of the hierarchical nature of the judiciary.
Advocate Lizelle Haskins, thank you very much indeed for your contribution. I do appreciate the time. Advocate Amelia Rohani Musalakai and the attorney Diana Mabasa. I really do appreciate the time. Also earlier, of course, you saw Professor Bonita Meyersfeld, who's also an advocate. That, I'm afraid, is all we have time for in that conversation. It's a very big topic. There'll be more conversations within our society and here about this issue.